Hello, and welcome to the Walrus Talks at Home Indigenous Perspectives on Belonging, presented by the Belonging Forum. My name is Jennifer Hollett, and I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus. I'm also your host and moderator for this talks. We're thrilled to be joining you online, bringing people together across the country and beyond, live in conversation. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on in Toronto, Ontario, Tekaronto. A land acknowledgement helps us recognize history, thinking about how it informs where we are now and what changes can be made moving forward in a commitment to reconciliation. Our offices and where I am right now in downtown Toronto are located within the bounds of Treaty 13 signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We're honored at the Walrus to contribute to a rich history of storytelling, and we welcome you to take a moment right now to reflect on the land that you're on, wherever you're joining us from this evening. As part of the ongoing work of reconciliation, if you haven't already or done so recently, we encourage you to read the 94 calls to action recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. All right, a bit more about the Walrus. The Walrus started as an optimistic project over 2 decades ago now to foster conversation across Canada. We recognize that these conversations are complex, they're necessary, so they take place in many forms of the Walrus. Online at thewalrus.ca, in print, I have our latest issue right here, on newsstands, or by subscribing to the Walrus. You can also listen to our podcasts or take part in events just like this one. And our work is made possible, empowered by our donors, our supporters, and our partners. A big thank you to the Belonging Forum, an initiative of the Samuel Center for Social Connectedness, for making this event possible. To kick off tonight's conversation, please welcome Kim Samuel, founder of the Belonging Forum. Hi, Kim. Welcome.
Okay. Good evening. Welcome to everyone. Humanity's quest for belonging isn't something new. Our quest for belonging is as ancient as humanity itself. With so much of humankind facing profound social isolation today, there are cultural groups and societies around the world that have been cultivating deep belonging on an ongoing basis for millennia. To me, belonging is wholeness. It's the experience of being at home in our communities, on our lands, and in the social and economic systems we inhabit. Belonging is connectedness in terms of not only people, but also place, power, and purpose. Indigenous cultures here in Turtle Island, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, are diverse and distinct. And many also share a common emphasis on values and practices that hold extraordinary power to create conditions of wholeness. For about 25 years, give or take, I've been on a journey to understand the challenge of social isolation. As a researcher, advocate, activist, and convener, I've been exploring the question of what it means to belong, as well as the question of how we build belonging in an age of isolation. Many of my teachers and mentors who hail from Indigenous communities, some right here on our Walrus Talks tonight, have over the years imparted on me the importance of what I consider to be 3 core values as essential to building belonging: reciprocity, recognition, and respect. To me, reciprocity means giving back to the land, to the animals, and to other people as a duty to maintain harmony in an ecosystem, a community, and in the broader world. It's a recognition that life is a gift, and the gift must keep moving. Recognition to me means honoring the inherent worth and interconnectedness of all beings, valuing the unique role each plays in sustaining the web of life. Everything has its place in the whole. And finally, To me, respect means acting on the truths of reciprocity and recognition in our day-to-day lives. It means meeting all community and nature with kindness, cooperation, and gratitude, working toward the continuity of life and the preservation of harmonious relationships. And while the conventional wisdom is to see belonging as a function of our connectedness to other human beings, belonging is also about our rootedness, our connectedness to the lands and the natural systems on which we depend. And again, while Indigenous traditions in Turtle Island and around the world are deeply diverse, many share a common perspective that nature isn't just a resource to be exploited, but a living force that calls us into relationship characterized by reciprocity, recognition, and respect. And what follows from this deep orientation is not just sustainability, but also harmony and balance. There are cultures that have lived in a harmonious and balanced relationship with nature for thousands of years. So when I think of the meaning of belonging, I think of our 3 R's: reciprocity, recognition, and respect. And I would also like to highlight something that my friend and teacher, Kluane Adamek, said to a class that I was teaching at McGill University many years ago. It's important, she said, how you show up in your community. For me, this is a lifelong quest for understanding. So I'm delighted that we'll now be hearing from our guest speakers, our Walrus talkers, who bring a really deep understanding of this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. All right. We're going to get into the Walrus Talks at Home. Here's how it works. Each speaker will give their talk one after the other live, and this will be followed by a moderated Q&A session with our talkers and all of you, our audience at home. So at any point while you're listening to the talks, feel free to submit your question in the comments section. We also ask when you post your question, let us know where you're joining us from. We also encourage you to share this conversation on social media. You can find us on the social platforms at The Walrus and use our hashtag Walrus Talks. Tonight, we will be hearing from Camryn Dewar, opera and classical singer, Fulbright Award winner, Dr. Becky Cook, Lands Monitoring Manager, Misipawistik Cree Nation, Kelly Lendsay, President and CEO, Indigenous Works, Chief Executive Transformation Officer, Luminary, and Chief Kluane Adamek, Assembly of First Nations Yukon Regional Chief. Thank you all for joining us, and we're going to get things started with Camryn Dewar. Welcome, Camryn.
I'm Camryn Dewar, and I'm currently joining from Lenape territory, as in I'm in New York City. I'm currently just in a room adjacent to an opera rehearsal that I will be joining immediately after this call is done. So just a little bit about me. So I'm from the Red River Métis Nation, and I grew up in Stony Mountain, Manitoba. And I've been into music ever since I was young. My dad's side of the family is the Métis side, and they've all been musicians their whole lives. And so I was very fortunate that it was passed down to me as well. And now I do Indigenous opera. And so I'm here in Montclair, New Jersey. I'm studying my Master of Music right now, and I'm on a Fulbright scholarship for my research in Indigenous opera, and specifically female representation in Indigenous opera and how that's evolved from 1879 to present day, which I think is really exciting because there's so much Indigenous opera that exists that people just don't know about, and so I feel very fortunate that I'm able to speak about that and to sing about it and to allow some of the New Jersey and eventually New York audiences to hear some of that repertoire. So I know we've all been asked, like all the speakers have been asked to just talk about how we find belonging and what belonging kind of means to us. And I think for me, just generally, belonging, I mean, it's been difficult. It's been difficult for me, specifically since I moved to New Jersey to find belonging, because especially growing up on my homeland in Manitoba, and I did my undergrad degree in music at the University of Manitoba, and it was so easy to feel connected to community, and all of my friends were Métis, and of course, all my family's Métis, and even my dad, all of his friends just happened to be Métis, and I grew up with them and their children as well, and so it's been a little bit more difficult for me ever since I moved to New Jersey. But the thing that keeps connecting me to other Indigenous people here over and over again is always the arts. I went to one event at an art museum. It was an opening of Native American art in Montclair. And I met a bunch of other people that now we're going to, like, I went to Juilliard yesterday to be able to hear another Indigenous opera singer sing a bunch of works by Native American composers. And, I really, at the end of the day, it's always just the arts I feel really, really connect us, which I'm very, very thankful for, because it's hard to find community when you're away from your homeland for the first time. And then for me, when it comes to opera and especially classical music, when there's not a lot of Indigenous representation, I find that I tend to experience belonging by collaborating with other Indigenous musicians and creators and just artists generally, but also specifically by seeing myself represented in artistic works. And there's not a ton of them, but there are a few, and I'm very grateful that we've reached a point in recent years where there are amazing operas with fantastic real Indigenous female characters that are relatable and authentic and genuine and complex and diverse. Because I feel that there's so much work that is done for us when we are able to see ourselves represented in something in any sort of genuine and authentic capacity. And I think just finally, the final way that I tend to just feel belonging or find belonging in the arts specifically is just being able to be part of works that are by us, and also for us. And there's a quote by Adam Godry that I think about a lot, and it's that in works that are about us, but not of us, you can always tell it's always a little bit uncomfortable. And I'm reflecting on why that is. It's because there is just a lack of the Indigenous voice, and so I've been very thankful to be able to be a part of so many operas that are written again by us and for us and have amazing, amazing real characters that I think really reflect us in genuine, authentic ways. And so, yeah, that's what I would say about how I'm able to find community and belonging, through music and seeing myself represented in works and being able to work with other Indigenous musicians who feel the same way. So, thank you. I'm gonna pass it off to Becky now. All right, Shimi Gwetch.
As I was introduced, my name is Becky Cook, and I'm coming to you from Misipawistik Cree Nation territory in the house that my parents built when they started having kids. They needed a bit more space and built a beautiful log house that we grew up in. I'm just gonna jump right into it. I come from the Inuit Nation, so I'm talking from an Inuit perspective. And for me, belonging is inherent in the Inuit way of life. Uh, I have worked with elders in my role as with Miss Pistic Cree Nation for quite a few years now, and we have a working group where we get together and we talk about important things to be teaching our kids. And one of those, a part of that is talking about our way of education. And a big part of that education is finding out is personal. For each person, it's a personal education. And within that system, everyone has a place. So the goal of your education is not to get a grade 12 diploma or get a university degree. It's really to find your role within the community and to learn all of the important skills, gather your bundle that you need, all the tools that you need for that role, for you to take that role on in the community. And we're still working on it because we have lost, excuse me, we've lost a lot throughout our history. You know, we as Indigenous peoples in Canada, uh, maybe I'll do like a little short history lesson here. Um, for those who are not aware, in 1763, it was when the British and French were first coming over to Canada, but the British Crown recognized that there were people on this land, and it wasn't empty land as some of the explorers viewed it. They recognized that Indigenous people had claim to the land, and the Royal Proclamation of 1763 recognized that and stated that we couldn't just take the land from the Indigenous people, that there needed to be a treaty that was made for any British citizens to take land. So that was really great for us. There's a basis for the treaties, and where I am in northern Manitoba, Misipawistik Cree Nation is signatory to Treaty 5. But after the treaties were signed, there was a little bit of issues. The verbal negotiations for the treaties weren't really matching what was written in the treaties. So we have a lot of treaty education. In Manitoba, we have a Treaty Relations Commission that does a lot of that education to make people aware that the actual written text of the treaties, and the numbered treaties specifically, is not 100% representative of what we have to look at. The spirit and intent of the treaties, and because there is actually proof that there were promises that were made in some of those numbered treaties that are not in the written text. But the big problem, I think, is after the numbered treaties were signed, that the Indian Act was implemented, or after the first of the numbered treaties were signed, the Indian Act was enacted, and that was where the autonomy and nationhood of First Nations was undermined. That was a foreign government that made a law over what was supposed to be an independent nation. So there's some people in the circles I run with, Kim's good friend Ovid McCurdy, he says that was an illegal law. You can't have a nation that makes a law over another nation. But that's what we're living under for the last 150 or so years, and that's still in place today. There is work to get rid of that, but with that Indian Act, it took a lot of our autonomy away as Indigenous nations. It took our agency away, and it took children away from their families. It really eroded our whole way of life. So the system that I'm talking about, where belonging is inherent in this Inuit way of life, I can't really talk in too much detail about it because we've lost a lot of that. And the work that I'm doing right now, I had just had a gathering this last weekend with a group of elders from Misipawistik Cree Nation, from Laurie House Cree Nation, our neighboring nation, and from one of the nations farther south in Manitoba, Pegos First Nation. We're working on putting together our heads and, piecing together what was that education that would raise up people in our communities who could find their place. And then the idea is, after we do that, we want to implement this in our community and start bringing back some of those systems within our community that really will help foster that belonging and to bring back pride in who we are as an Inuit people. And just bring that back and bring back healthy livelihoods, healthy people, healthy communities in our nation. I think that that's really where Canada is going. We've had a lot of commissions. Jennifer mentioned the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations, and all of those are urging Canada and Canadians to allow First Nations to bring back their own systems, because that's the systems that work for us. And for us, that would really recognizes that we belong in Canada, which is something that since the Indian Act was enacted, we did not belong in Canada. So we want to actually have a place within this country, and that's the way that we do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky, and to Camryn. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kelly Lendsay. I'm President and CEO of Indigenous Works. I'm going to read to you a land acknowledgement. I want you to guess where I am in the world today. So I want to acknowledge the Luminary families, the owners of the land, and pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. And I recognize their contribution and connection to country and the role in caring for and maintaining the country for over thousands of years. I'm speaking from Broadbeach, just south of Brisbane in Australia. I'm down here for a conference, and when Kim extended this invitation, the timing worked out great. So I'm so pleased to join the esteemed panelists and the Walrus. I want to shift the sense of belonging to workplace belonging. And as you think about workplaces, it's something that we all have a connection to. And how included do we feel in today's workplaces? So that's the work we've been doing for close to 30 years, really looking at this area of workplace belonging and inclusion. And it's a very basic question. And the Gallup poll did probably the most extensive work, surveying hundreds of thousands, literally millions actually, of people. And the number one engagement driver for people in the workplace was, do I feel included? There was, do I feel valued? Do I have a good relationship with my supervisor? Is my work appreciated? Am I challenged? There are these engagement drivers, but the core of it is what we're talking about today is, do I belong? Do I have this sense of feeling included? So you can put this whole topic of belonging and inclusion in this powerful sense of an engagement driver. We have an inclusion continuum. It's a 7-stage roadmap to becoming an employer of choice. And the idea was, if you can actually look at the competencies, the attributes, the values that people can build as managers, you can actually make more inclusive workplaces where people do feel that they belong. And if you can then build those competencies, you can actually measure them. You can actually train. And so that's what really gave birth to the inclusion continuum, a 7-stage roadmap, so that people could benchmark their workplace competencies, their performance, and a way to truly change the social and economic culture of their workplaces. So when I think about the power of belonging, this example, although it's for negative sense, but if you look at gangs and you look at prisons, they understand belonging. They have a strong sense of commitment. People belong. And so it's those principles that I think to say that putting it and channeling it towards positive attributes is, how do we harness that to make people feel that indeed they have a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging? What I really like about this is that belonging, I think my final point is that it does have a humanistic value. This is not Indigenous or non-Indigenous. This is about all nations, all people, asking a very basic question. How are we welcoming newcomers to Canada? How are we welcoming Ukrainian families that are fleeing? How are Indigenous people welcoming other Indigenous people from other parts of the nations or around the world? So this is where I get excited about the work. And I'm seeing as I watched the video of the walrus, all the different themes and areas, jobs. Well, I just wrote some of them down. Jobs, the area of course, reconciliation. So think of belonging in this reconciliation or economic reconciliation theme. We got to move beyond the romantic and cosmetic side of economic reconciliation and belonging. We need to move towards things that are going to help people build their communities, build themselves and their families, build our country, and address some real pressing issues that are around this world. And I think that's the exciting part. And thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Lendsay, Kluane, Adamek, Uye, Dakwedi, Ayahat, Gayohat Yulselg, Gunach Chish Ta'an, Gunach Chish Kwamlan Dun. I'm so pleased to be joining you from the, yes, a very cold Yukon. It's about 20 below here. This is a photo just off my back porch. So the beautiful Yukon River. And really want to acknowledge the speakers before, and it's so important to get a sort of depth and breadth when it comes to hearing from Indigenous voices from coast to coast to coast. As mentioned, I'm joining you live from the Yukon. I do live in Whitehorse proper, but certainly when it comes to a lot of our rural communities, my dad lives in my community, Kluane First Nation, Burwash Landing, and about less than between 100 and 120 residents, depending on in the summer and the winter. And I've often had that question, like, how can people live there and not feel so isolated, right? Because you're from a population perspective and from a very sort of Western colonial worldview, we might think of that as someone being so isolated. But actually, my dad doesn't want to live anywhere else because that's where he feels the most connected. That's where he feels the most belonging. He is an avid gatherer. He loves to go out in all seasons. He spends time on the land. He speaks the language. And so, for him, that is the sense of belonging that he needs. We then think about sort of, the young teenager, perhaps growing up in a world of, technology meets social media, meets bullying, meets what does that mean to be a young Indigenous person in this world. And I certainly don't envy this generation with all the pressures that they must feel. And so how do we support those young people to feel that sense of belonging? And in the work that we've done through our regional office and creating, and this is all very Googleable, but the Reconnection Vision, which you can Google, was really a plan. And you can hear my daughter. She's 1.5 and she's about to have her supper. So she's excited about that. But you can, in looking at the Reconnection Vision, it's all about equipping young people with that sense of self and that sense of connection to the land and the water. And, the teachings that come from generations, and there's over 50 languages across Canada alone. There's over 600 nations. We are all very different, but at the same time, when it comes to worldview and that responsibility we have to connect to the land and the water, it's in most cases when our elders talk about healing or how do you reconnect, it is very much about going and connecting with the land. It's about dipping your feet in the water. It's about taking a moment to be aware of your surroundings and to immerse yourself in those. And I certainly, have felt in moments where, and want to acknowledge, Camryn and her being so far away from home and And there is that sense of disconnection. And so how do you find a sense of belonging no matter where you are? And in all the travels that I've been privileged to do while serving as regional chief, I've always tried to find, no matter where I am in place and space, whether it's a board meeting or in a community, taking a moment to connect with the land around you. In particular, putting some tobacco down or putting your feet in the water, giving gratitude. As human beings, we have become so disconnected from our environmental world. And, as we refer to as, Mother Earth, our responsibility is to be her caretaker. And as human beings, especially in the last 300 years, we have seen, the impacts of an ever-changing climate, global warming, and, GHG emissions, etc. We've also become disconnected as human beings. And so that sense of belonging, for those of you who are looking for that, is really, in my view, a big part of it is connecting with the physical world around you. And even in what some would describe as a concrete jungle, there's always going to be somewhere where you can find some trees or water, and just taking a moment to really connect. And that would be, I would say for those seeking that sense of belonging, there's a whole lot more we can talk about through culture, connection, connectedness. But the sense of belonging as human beings is that we are one with the land and the water. And so let's take some time to lean in on that a bit more. Just cheers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our talkers, Camryn Dewar, Becky Cook, Kelly Lendsay, and just now Chief Kluane, Adamek. All right, we're excited to open this up and get into it. For our audience, let us know where you are joining us from. Let's take a look. We have audience members registered really from all over. Hello to Burnaby, Calgary, Dorval. Hi to Hamilton. We have Banff, Falconbridge, and Whitehorse. Thank you for letting us know where you're tuning in from. This is one of my favorite things about doing talks at home is that we have people at home across Canada and around the world, including our talkers. We are continuing to take questions. So if you have a question, it's not too late to ask. Just put it in the Zoom chat. I'd now like to welcome back our talkers, as well as Kim Samuel, who's going to join me to listen in. And I have some questions to kick us off, and then we are going to get to our audience questions. So for our talkers, just turn your video back on. We'll get you back in the mix. And thank you so much. Lots to reflect on. I have to say, one of the things that I noticed, oh, great. Thanks, Kim. One of the things I noticed is you all reference where you are, not just the land acknowledgement, but you gave us some context, your relationship to the space. So I'm curious for each of you, when you create a space or you host, you present, is this part of how you incorporate belonging? And what else might you consider when you're trying to bring that into your work? Camryn, I would love for you to kick us off because you mentioned you're like, hey, I'm kind of behind the scenes here. Give us context.
Well, yeah, I mean, I really kind of valued what Kluane said about trying to connect to your land, and I think that's something that I need to do a little more. But again, it's difficult when you're in literally a concrete jungle. But I'm lucky that I live in New Jersey, where there is a little bit more nature out there. But I mean, where we are just impacts every single thing about our experience, because I mean, just your environment impacts, again, how your nervous system is working and what you're thinking about and how present you are in the moment and just everybody who you're going to be interacting with. And so, I think it's incredibly important to consider where you are when you're doing certain works. I'm sorry. I'm thinking about if that answered your question.
Absolutely. And Becky gave us the history of your home, which is pretty incredible. So if you can tell us a little bit about how you try to bring in belonging and history into your work.
Sure. So I mean, I'm very lucky that I've been again like growing up on my homeland and everything, and being very connected to specifically the land that my family owns. Both sides of my parents' families owned farmland, and I grew up on the land, and I was like 3 years old, tending my grandpa's garden, and eating carrots right out of the ground with all the dirt on it still, and I think it tastes better with it when it has a little bit of dirt on it.
Very.
Yeah, and so I think I just like that's it's really important to me being able to grow up on the places where I mean like where we had land that have been passed down, because I feel that you feel such I don't know, just more of a connection to it when it is yours, because it is so rare that as Indigenous people who've been disenfranchised, that we're actually able to have land that we call our own and are able to still tend to this day. And yeah, and so for example, I did the first year of my Master of Music here 2 years ago. And then I found out that they were doing a Métis opera at Manitoba Opera called Likar Riel's Heart of the North. And it's about like Louis Riel and also the women in his life that impacted, impacted his life and his vision. And I was all the way out here in New Jersey, and I was just thinking about how the story's about me. It's about Métis women from Manitoba being part of the Red River Resistance. And I really thought long and hard about it, because I was like, okay, I'm supposed to be finishing my degree. I've moved countries. I'm all the way out here. I'm on a visa. But I just was thinking about, again, this story is about me, and it's on my homeland. And I just, there's no way that I would be able to miss that, and to be able to live with myself. So I took a year off and then went home, and I learned, took jigging lessons. Then I got to jig and sing in Michif and Anishinaabe and everything, and to be able to do all of that on my homeland with like all of my dad and all of his relatives in the audience was so special. And my auntie told me that she cried when she's like saw me jigging on the stage and everything. And so I'm really really glad that I went back home to do that show, because I really think that was a once in a lifetime opportunity for me. And that opera just won a bunch of awards, by the way, because we sold out all the shows, because I was doing community engagement work. So yeah, thank you.
To hear it. I'd like to bring Becky into the conversation. Becky, bring your space and your relationship and community into your work.
Yeah, I think that that's hugely important. And one of the things that I forgot to mention is the land. So really, Kluane, I want to acknowledge that too, because a big part of our work and this space, is being connected to the land. My mom and dad, when they built this house, they went out and they actually selected all the trees, and they cut down these trees and they peeled these trees and built their house out of that. So it was for them like a labor of love. It took them 7 years, but it was something I think that they really wanted to do, because it was bringing back a tradition, but working on that instead of yeah, relying on the government to build you a home, which some people do, but I don't fault them for that. But that's part of the colonization as well. Like we were made to be dependent on the government. Right? Government. That's part of the Indian Act as well. We became wards of the state, and they interfered with so many parts of our lives, so we became dependent. But this, for me, I'm like so proud of this house, even though I didn't have any part. I was like a little toddler running around when they were building it, but um because it has that connection to the land, because of all the love that went into it, and because of just it's a beautiful place for me, and like the heart. I grew up here, so just this reiterating, I guess, what Camryn and Kluane were talking about, is that community and that connection to the land and that place. That those are all huge parts of belonging from an Inuit and an Indigenous, I guess, and a lot of Indigenous cultures. That those are huge parts of that. Thank you.
Becky, as a kid running around, that's what makes a house a home. So I'm sure, you're like, I don't have much with it, but then for you to also carry on, that's so beautiful. Kelly, curious in your work, especially considering you're on the other side of the world right now, how you bring belonging into the work that you're doing right now.
I mean, at the core of it, there's been books written, we are tribal people. You can look at herds and learn from animal kingdoms about we're all herd-like instincts. We want to belong. A mare will discipline the colt, like keeping her out of the group, right, until the colt settles down, and then let the colt back in, and so there is this sort of internal sense of wanting to belong, and I think the sense of connection is, as I said, when we go beyond just acknowledging, for example, land, to say, learn something about the spirit, the cultural, the social, the historical connection of the names, the people. Relate one story when you do a land acknowledgement, and that will create a real connection. People say, all right, yeah, you belong because you took time to get curious. And we as Indigenous people need to do the same thing. Just because we're Indigenous, we don't know all the lands. We have to Google and look up. If you've never been to Nunavut, if you've never been around the world to the Hopi, you have to do that little bit of effort as well. So that's the connection that I see is we're learning. Everyone is learning. And I think it needs to be in that spirit of fun and discovery and not under this black cloud. It's make it more fun. And wow, I learned something really cool about your territories. It means the two rivers that come together and your people did this. And you go, and I'll tell you something. Often Indigenous people will say, geez, I didn't even know that about my own place. Thank you for sharing that.
Love that. Kluane, and then Kim, I'm going to come to you for a question.
Yeah, no, I feel like we could probably chat all evening. But in terms of my work, and that, how do I bring the belonging? I introduced myself, and I come from the Kluane, a killer whale clan, and I
Or can I just say, like, that's like a hardcore introduction, like killer whale.
whoa, uh, and there are parts of me that I do bring to the work in terms of how how I've been mentored and trained in terms of leadership and how to show up, how to deal with conflicts, how to raise issues, being hard on the issues, soft on the people, so that you're actually able to create that sense of belonging while addressing some really hard issues. And that, is certainly something that I want to pay a lot of tribute to here in the Yukon, is that and one of the teachings in terms of place and space that I had learned was, it's so cold here that there were issues about land, there were issues about resources, hunting territories, and so on. But at the end of the day, it was also about survival, because it's like really cold. It's a lot warmer than it used to be up here. And so people had to find a way to work through things together. And at the end of the day, that's sort of what it was about. So those are some of the approaches in terms of the work, nationally, and hard conversations and challenging moments, sort of bringing that with me, and reminding myself of, again, who I am, and where I come from, through the names we carry. My name's Agay. That was my great 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 grandmother's name. So sort of that reconnection of sort of where we come from, I think, is really important, because those names come with stories, come with songs. And so that then gets passed through the next generations. I mean, I'm thinking about Becky and the logs in your home. Like, the logs must have heard a lot of stories over the years, right? So it's like that transition of knowledge, I do feel also brings that sense of belonging, because it's a way for young people to know that they come from, as our elders would say, like strong and noble people. And so when you know your history and you know where you come from, there's a huge sense of pride that comes with that. And that's certainly something that no matter where I go, I'm super humbled. Like the women who would dog team into Whitehorse to have their babies and then dog team the same day to go home, or people who were giving birth under trees. Like especially just having a 1.5-year-old now, it like blows my mind that that's just the way things were. Women were giving birth all over if they needed to in terms of being out in the bush. That's what we did. And so that is an important reminder, I think, about again, just sort of like knowing the strength of the people that have come before and sort of like charging forward with that in whatever, capacity you're doing that, whether it's working with organizations or if it's, advancing through opera, which is also like so very cool. And like, having Googled Becky, who's like, and geologist meets scientist meets botanist, I think, like all these really amazing things. Thanks, Grandma Google. So it's, I just, it's really neat to see Indigenous peoples taking our place in all of these different facets of, career or however you might put it. But sort of taking that sense of who we are with us as we go.
Kelly, Kluane, have that curiosity and the fun. That's it. Yeah.
Can I build upon what Kluane was saying about conflict and hard issues? I mean, look, here's a Indigenous female leader dealing with issues that affect not just her territories, Canada and the world, UNDRIP with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So I think belonging is, again, not always in this harmonious sense. Belonging means I have a voice, and where there's conflict or differences, I'm welcome to actually bring that forward. And you see this in Indigenous politics and community. There are hard issues. There is disagreement over social, economic, political models and approaches. So to me, I think that's really one of the real tests of belonging is, does everyone have a voice? Are they able to bring that forward? Do you actually welcome dissent? And do you actually welcome, and that's why Indigenous people have so much oral discussions, because they're debating. They're arguing, they're disagreeing, they're putting forward points, and then they're switching and changing their minds. It is so organic, and it is so misunderstood. And that is why it takes more time for partnerships and concepts to evolve and get developed. It's not because they're sitting holding hands, it's they're debating. And they have this openness. But you got to have that sense of inclusion and belonging to have space. For example, women to have space, youth to have space, someone to bring the voice of the land into that space, right? So that's, to me, would be the really interesting test is where it's difficult, where, as Kluane was saying, conflict, hard issues. What's the sense of belonging at that point in time?
It's a great test. All right, Kim, over to you for a question. And then after that, I'm going to check in with the audience.
Thank you. I'm here taking notes as fast as I can. I wanted to pick up actually something, Kelly, that you were just talking about, which is maybe what is a test of belonging, and I believe the other talkers came to this as well, which is maybe in my vernacular would be the rootedness that comes from knowing your land and knowing where you come from and taking pride in that and being grounded in that and being part of a community. And then I think about and my question is going to be about reciprocity. When we stand up in a community and say, this is who I am, this is my story, and I ask that you respect me and believe me, and I will do the same for you. I'm just putting words to something that probably don't need words in what you're talking about, but coming from different traditions, it's about how does it all work and who holds the space. So my question is, and it's for anyone who wants to hop in to it, is how do we bring people in to the circle who feel like they are out of the circle in terms of belonging?
Great question. Who wants to give that one a go?
I'll give it a go. Another part of my work is working with youth in the community on the land and trying to implement some of these aspects of our traditional education. In that setting, Kim, you know, I w- I try to create a really safe space, right? And I think that's huge in bringing in some people who feel like they're outcast or whatever. Because I think in that instance, sometimes people feel like, they don't want to be there or they're uncomfortable there because this is not a for some reason a welcoming or a space that feels safe to you. So, uh, you know, we sit in a circle every day. We get to know each other slowly. We do that on the land, and I think that that's a huge part too. Like, it's been proven that being outdoors is good for your mental health, and it just makes you feel better overall. But also, talking to people about expectations, right? Like to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. Don't try and speak over someone, and everyone has something valid to say, right? So when someone's speaking, we're listening, and not to be judgmental about what someone's saying. Like you had said, right? This is your story. You know, let's respect that. Uh,
I'll quickly that
let Gelato.
I would say, Kim, look, again, when you welcome people, if it's in a obviously sensitive issues and so on, is one. I think going back to some basic values, start with kindness and start with that value of kindness. I think that people get afraid that if I step into the circle, I'm stuck or I can't get out. So it's back to it's a series of steps. And as Becky was saying, it's safe and you can't leave. Step in, but you can leave the circle until you're comfortable to want to stay in the circle. So to me, I think those are some basic principles: kindness, the safety, you can exit, and you're checking in to make sure people do feel comfortable and that it's working for them.
I want to get to a couple audience questions before we're out of time. The first one is for Camryn, and the second question will be for Kluane. Aiden from Alabama, who says howdy, has a question for Camryn. I was curious if there were any specific Indigenous operas that you've worked on as well, and I know you mentioned something you've just been a part of, as well as what operas you would recommend that have good representation. And I would love to know what even got you into the opera in the first place.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, we can start from where I got into the opera in the first place. So I had the privilege of, in my undergrad degree, University of Manitoba, in the opera department, they put on like a scenes concert, and it was scenes from this opera called Missing, which is by Marie Clemence and Brian Current, and it's about missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I was like approached about doing it, and I played the role of Native Girl. And it's about the Highway of Tears in British Columbia, like the whole opera. And so yeah, and so I got to sing a duet from that where it's Native Girl and a white girl. And what happens is that, like Native Girl, it's very sad that she has been murdered, and Ava, who's the white girl, finds her body, and then Native Girl inhabits Ava's body with her. And so Ava looks in the mirror in the bathroom and she sees Native Girl instead, and they speak to each other for the first time. And they realize that they're just the same person. That the only thing that's different about them is their culture. And it's very heartbreaking, but very beautiful. And as we were singing that, I felt my entire soul like pouring out of my body. And I've been singing opera for like 20 years. I was like 4 years old when I started, and I never ever had a visceral experience with singing opera like that before. And I think again, it was just it was absolutely of us and for us, and I really really felt the connection to just like to the again, I felt like my ancestors were with me as I was kind of screaming out for justice and for empathy and truth in that moment. So that was truly the moment that showed me that I wanted to do opera. So yeah, so Missing is one of the other operas that I would recommend. And then there's a new one called that I just did in Banff in June called Indians on Vacation. And that one's by composer Ian Cuson, who's Métis, and then librettist Royce Vabrick, who lives in New York City here, and it's based on the book Indians on Vacation by oh my God, Thomas King. And it's hilarious and just absolutely just so much fun. But also again like real. There's like real people and just a ton of fun. So Indians on Vacation is one that I would recommend. And Missing, and then Ikar Real is Heart of the North. And there's so many others too, but those are my top.
Thank you so much for that. Our final question, Kluane, I'm going to send this your way. It's from Rex, all the way from South Africa, who asks, what does it mean in this age of isolation? The paradox of modern life where we're seeing increased connectivity and decreased connection, urbanization and migration and changing family structures. What are the consequences of this paradox of modern life? And I'd be curious, Kluane, from the north, your perspective on all these things that are kind of working against each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, being a mom now has, had me thinking a lot, truly. What does it mean to have, she's playing with a water bottle. What does it mean to have children like in this generation? Because it's, let's be candid, like the world's looking pretty bleak. We look at the States and what's just happened. Cautions around, the space that's, I think, being created for a lot of racism and discrimination that people have fought long and hard to address. So there's that part. But then there's also finding, I think, what a term that I was sort of learning through COVID, like active hope, right? It's like there is all of that. But then there's, nations that are coming out with Indigenous and protected conserved areas, and young people that are learning their language. And like my daughter loves to drum, like she loves it. And, she's performed with our group, and you can just see that she is feeling something. And so it's sort of, I do not envy this generation for some of the challenges that they have to deal with in terms of, ongoing systemic issues with respect to racism, racism in the healthcare system, racism when it comes to justice and policing in this country, Indigenous people is losing their lives at the hands of the police, and that's real. Like it's in the news, probably going to be, if not tonight, tomorrow. So there is that, but I do, as hard as it is finding that active hope and knowing that, as Indigenous peoples, knowing our stories are tens of thousands of years old, that we've had to deal with a lot. We've had to deal with discrimination, residential schools, impacts of colonization, and it has been, our language, our stories, our culture, and who we are, connection to land. That has been, those have been the things that have got us through. So as hard as it can be in moments where it just feels like everything is, for lack of a better term, a dumpster fire. And I say that for any of the young people that are online, because I'm seeing that used a lot in like TikTok. We've got to find the active hope. And it isn't an easy thing to do. But it does require us to lean in a bit and to think and to find those things, as fluffy as it may sound, but that we are grateful for, and the things that can humble us in moments that are tough. I see how. Yeah, she wants to put on her jammy. Yeah, you'd like to put that on. Go show your dada. He's gonna help you. Okay.
We're talking about her and her generation.
Gingerbread pajamas. Yeah. Okay. You want to put them on?
I'm here. Well, Kluane, I think Act of Hope is a great one to wrap on. So thank you so much to all of our talkers. I'm going to tell our audience a little bit more about what we have coming up. Thank you, Camryn Dewar. Thank you, Becky Cook, Kelly Lendsay, Kluane, Adamek, and Kim Samuel for joining us during the Q&A as well. If you enjoyed this virtual event, we have more coming up before the end of the year. On Monday, December 2nd, we'll be hosting the Walrus Talks Canada's Health Security. You can join us in Toronto. We'll also have a live stream to hear experts in health security and crisis initiatives address how the country should prepare for extreme climate events, international hostilities, and the next health crisis. Heavy topics, we were just talking about the state of the world, but important topics to ensure that we're prepared for whether it's next COVID or wildfires. And then on Wednesday, December 4th, we'll be back here on Zoom for the Walrus Talks at Home Polarization. Join us for a very important and timely conversation regarding this growing divide, whether it's politics, social, cultural. We're going to be covering the full range and what we can do about it. Keep an eye on your inbox. We're going to send you a follow-up email. If you'd like to stay in touch with the Walrus, yes, you'd like to stay in touch with the Walrus, your best bet is to opt in for our free newsletter. So stay tuned for that. You can also visit us at thewalrus.ca/events. That's where we post our event schedule, where you can register. We also post videos from all of our talks, including this one, in the Walrus Talks video room on our website. The Walrus is home to Canada's community-supported conversation. That means our journalism and our events are powered and made possible by people just like you. We are a registered charity with an educational mandate, so we rely on our community support to power independent, fact-based journalism and our thought-provoking events. So if you enjoyed this free event, we encourage you to join our community of donors in supporting Canada's conversation. Just swing by thewalrus.ca/support to ensure we can continue doing this work. A big thanks again to the Belonging Forum for their generous support. Thank you to our annual sponsors, Air Canada, Bullfrog Power, Inspire, RBC, Emerging Artists, and Rogers. And thank you all for tuning in, for all your comments and questions in chat, and for your curiosity and commitment moving forward to the work of belonging. Have a great evening, everyone.